I am here with David Berger once again. You can find his musings, his blogs, his adventures, his stories of global travel and life in Zambia on his website, davidberger.net. I will also be linking to his YouTube channel in the comments. And today I've asked him to tackle a particularly touchy topic, and that is race and racism.
Yeah, well, thank you very much again for the introduction, Alex. Today's topic is very sensitive. As you can imagine, each one of us deals with racism every day in our lives and makes judgments about how we view other people. And it is a particularly hot topic in the United States and globally today. There is no politically correct way to discuss racism and privilege. And there is no really culturally appropriate or acceptable way to talk about it without offending someone somewhere. And so I do apologize. None of my musings or my thoughts on the subject are meant to offend anyone, and none of my comments or terminology are meant to offend anyone. I would just like to talk about the subject and talk about my experience with it, and I hope that you are not offended by it.
If you can't take it, turn the video off now.
Yeah. Well, so Alex and I were both born in Cortez, Colorado, which is a small service and supply town in the southwest of Colorado. And we moved to Arizona, which, as you may be aware, is a very conservative state. We are famously well known worldwide for SB 1070, which was quite the racist law. And we have quite a few issues in our state with racism, particularly against Latin Americans, Mexicans, Latinos, Hispanics, but with most other non-Caucasian, non-white races, which is very unfortunate. You see it in our lawmaking, you see it in our politics, you see it in the very warm reception of Trump during his speech in the state earlier this month. And you can imagine that throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, when you're in a very homogeneous population and you don't have much exposure to other races and other cultures, you start to get this mentality and this understanding of your place in the world and your privilege that is, of course, biased. You don't really have an awareness of how privileged you are and the opportunity you have as growing up as a white, Caucasian, white male, you know. And it's really interesting the way that our parents, Joe and Ed Berger, worked with the two of us and helped expose us to so many different cultures growing up. We took yearly trips down to Puerto Penasco in the Sonoran Desert, and it was constantly an atmosphere of inclusion, of learning the language, of playing with the Mexican children there, and of being accepting of their culture, and of being open and having a warm heart and hospitality and hearth. And it wasn't really until middle school and then high school that I encountered a mentality that was very set in hatred and racism. And that included awful off-color jokes. It included constantly berating, Hispanics are responsible for the destruction of the United States. Immigrants and illegals are the death of this nation. And I say that from a point of view of I don't believe that, but being exposed to that and having my peers repeating those things that they had heard from their parents and from their political and social background was very difficult for me. And I didn't know what to do or where to be. And that led to some conversations about race with the folks. But for the most part, it was the start of my real understanding that a world of inclusion and a world of acceptance and love and standing side by side with people of any race and of any background is the way the world should be. That's what I believe. That's what I thought. That's what I was raised in. And then to be exposed to that in those formative years of middle school and high school was quite difficult. You know, it was a clash of worldviews, and I didn't know how to balance being, you know, socially acceptable and friendships and where I stood socially in the hierarchy, especially in high school, with friends who were more popular that held these beliefs, and how to have conversations with them, and how to try and break down that ignorant and unfounded hatred that was just based off, well, that's what my parents say, or that's what I heard on the radio today, so that must be the way it is. So that ignorance and fear helped shape my understanding throughout middle school and high school. And I became first the webmaster and then the president of the Key Club, which was doing outreach and community service. And I was very active in the community in theater and choir and art and trying to reach out. And I was able to find a group of friends that didn't quite buy into that nasty rhetoric. And as I moved to Tempe and moved into Arizona State University, I was once again exposed to this hateful rhetoric that was all about how immigrants and anyone not us was destroying our nation, was taking our jobs, was ruining our schools, was kidnapping and raping and murdering, you know, just absolutely ridiculous. But this ingrained hatred and denialism that has no founding other than if we create us versus them, we can have power and we can have a scapegoat for what's going wrong in our lives instead of taking responsibility for it and moving forward.
And to clarify, that wasn't at the university, it was just part of the curriculum, it was within, or was it?
No, it was not. No, the curriculum and the university professors that I worked with were of the highest quality. I was involved in Barrett, which was open and accepting and welcomed people of all colors, all races, all backgrounds, on intellectual merit alone. And throughout my learning career at Arizona State, I was exposed to professors that were just absolutely fantastic. George Thomas, one of my professors who talked about the global village and global culture and globalization and the formation of a world culture, often broke down into racism and our understanding of the world and prejudice and how to work through it. And Carolyn Warner was another fantastic example, as well as Douglas Webster, who became one of my mentors moving into my thesis, and then Thomas Puleo, who taught us about UNESCO and World Heritage and really allowed us to understand and break down what it means in a sense of place, in a sense of culture and identity, and help us to understand those barriers that we have and the privileges that we have, and to really get into the meat of what it means to be human and the shared experience that is the human event, that is the epitome of humanity, which is to be together as brethren and to be joined together through our common similarities and not through our differences. And they supported me through my research and through my travel study throughout Europe and Eastern Europe and Turkey. And they also expanded my mind and my horizons in unbelievable ways. I mean, it was just fantastic. As I moved through that, though, I had classmates and I had social pairings with people. I mean, Arizona State is a massive university. I think they have 72,000 enrolled students this year. So you run into people of all makes, all sizes, and all beliefs, and sometimes those that are consumed by hatred or ignorance or looking for a scapegoat are a little bit louder than the rest. So that was another formative experience, moving through that and having the support and background of professors and having their understanding of the world coming through, and then also having, you know, this kind of repressed, very red state, very, you know, USA is only for the white mentality of some of my classmates, which was just ridiculous and unbelievable and shocking.
So then from Arizona, you ended up in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
And how did that contrast and that experience then shape things?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of a journey. So after I graduated from Arizona State University, I went to work for the American Red Cross as an emergency services logistics person. And I responded to the Wallow Fire in 2011, and I was trained as part of a DAT, disaster action team, and I took classes with them. But I was exposed to, again, this mentality within myself of wanting to help regardless of someone's social standing or race, and, you know, of giving a helpful hand and reaching out and being there to support someone. And so that mentality also brought me to Peace Corps, and I joined Peace Corps and was assigned and invited to serve in Zambia. And then I arrived in Zambia, and my whole world was turned upside down once again. You know, and as I've mentioned, this is a very sensitive subject, and I'm pushing through it here, but in Zambia, you have a reverse culture shock. Well, I mean, it's not reverse. You have culture shock, and you have racism on both sides. You have privileged whites who are still feeding off of the British colonial system and who are afforded respect and afforded deference just based on the color of their skin. And being a white Caucasian male volunteer, I was afforded that. An example of that is hitchhiking on the side of the road. I would be standing with my counterpart, and we're very good friends, talking. A car would stop and say, "You, Mzungu," which is a word that encompasses foreigner. It's become kind of a status symbol. If someone in Zambia is doing very well, then they can be a Mzungu, but it's traditionally based off of the Swahili for wanderer or foreigner. You Mzungu, you can ride with us, but not the Zambian. And it's like, these are fellow black Zambians who wouldn't allow another black Zambian from the rural areas into the vehicle, but were happy to pick me up, even though there were open seats. And oftentimes I wouldn't have to pay for rides, or I could walk into a government office, and it's like I would go with my villagers, and I would position myself outside of the offices, and I would send them in, and the government officials sometimes, and I'd call them out on it, which didn't earn me too many friends, but oftentimes earned me respect, would ignore my villagers. And I speak in a very possessive term because I'm very connected to them, and they made a huge impact in my life. But my groups and the groups that I was working with would go in with a proposal that we had written together, and they would be ignored. I would see officials lift up a paper and look at the paper and say, "I'm busy," and just completely ignore them, or make them beg. You know, I'd seen some of my community health workers and specifically trained birth attendants have to beg for attention and to be recognized by some government officials. Whereas I would walk in with the same papers, and immediately there's deference, and there's like, "Oh, my friend, it's so nice to see you. How can we help you today?" And if I submitted that proposal, it would be reviewed and possibly funded. And that was very aggravating. You know, and then I would sit down and say, "Okay, so what's going on? You know, why is it okay for me to walk in and have your attention, but when my community group comes, they're ignored?" And they're like, "Oh, well, you know how things are. You know, things are just that way, and these people, they don't usually have their proposals together, and they haven't written them properly, and it's not worth the time to go through. But you, I know everything will be in order." And it's like, okay, well, but I mean, we wrote this together. I mean, this is my community group, and the community group would come in and join me. And that's one anecdotal experience from my service, and it happened a couple of times in conversations at bars with other Zambians, and sometimes outright violence against Mzungus or whites. Not always whites. Mzungus could also be Indian or Chinese, although usually the Chinese had their own brand of commentary, which was pretty nasty.
So how did it feel? Oh, sorry, do continue.
No. Well, and just sometimes people would say, "We don't need you, like whites don't belong here, like we're a black country and we can be okay without you." And I had someone, you know, actually threaten me and almost get in a fight in a bar one night, coming on that tact. And I'm like, hold on, we're here under invitation from the government. Like, I don't believe in any difference between the two of us. I mean, the only difference is skin deep, and it's not a difference at all. Like, sit down, have a beer with me, let's have a conversation. And we diffused the issue, but it was, you know, it's frightening.
Yeah, so maybe if you're up for it, elaborate a little bit more on the difference, because here you came from becoming the absolute majority, I suppose, to being basically the absolute minority. But it was complicated because you weren't a minority without power.
We were privileged, and we had
Privileged,
power.
correct, yeah.
You know, when I was assigned to my village and dropped off, I didn't have a neighbor at that time. And my closest neighbor was another CHIP volunteer who was...
And what's a CHIP volunteer?
CHIP is Community Health Improvement Program. And she was like 45, 50 kilometers away and then out in the bush. And then other than that, there was a Chinese construction camp, which was all just Chinese. Only Chinese. There were no Zambians working or interacting with them. It was just absolutely xenophobic, just a little block of Chinese that didn't interact with anybody else. And we were the only Mzungus. We were the only foreigners, within, what is that, almost 40 miles, 45 miles. And so when I did outreach, I would meet children who were 6 or 7 and sometimes even 8 or 9 who had never met someone with light skin. And so it was just unbelievable. And you'd run into older Zambians who had been educated under the British system, who were very deferential and very polite. And, of course, there was curiosity where everyone would run out to see the person with the strange skin or the fact that I had hair on my arms and my face. You know, it was a trip for them that my hair was so light-colored. But, yeah, it caused a lot of frustration for me and a lot of anger and a lot of angst. And I remember, not necessarily blowing up, but being very aggressive at times of saying, absolutely not, do not call me Mzungu. Do not refer to me only by my skin color. It's just awful. It's like you have 2 people in a room and somebody walks in and says, oh, well, there's a black one and a white one. It's like, no. Like, there are 2 people in a room, period. Like, what does it matter if he's black or if I'm white? There's no difference. There's no reason that there should be a differentiation. And so I would have those conversations with my community, and I would often say, no, I have a name, and this is my name, and then, I'd say my village name as well. And I'm like, you can yell at me, you can call out my name as I pass by, I'm happy to greet you. You can call me Kapia, which was my village name. That's fine. But if you yell at Mzungu at me or Buga at me when I travel by, and Buga, there's a couple different variations of where it comes from. Some people say it means boss from Afrikaans. Some people say it's after the Buga fish. Some people say it's like a ghost, like a demon, like you're a wandering spirit that possesses people, and it's like Buga Buga, like the scary ghost. But it's not a very pleasant term to call somebody. And I would often try and educate them. So if someone would say that to me, I would stop and I would say, hold on, no. Like, let's talk about why that's not okay. Like, and I'd use local language and I'd be like, how do you feel if I walk up to you and say, black man? Like, you don't feel very good, do you? Like, it's not very nice. And so when you run up to me and yell, like, white, 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 how do you think that I react to that? How do you think that I feel inside? I don't feel good. And so I want you to use my name, and I want you to talk to me as equals, and I want to work together, on the same playing field. Although I didn't use playing field. I tried to use level, and using local language was quite difficult. But, trying to overcome that prejudice. And at times using it to my advantage, like walking into those offices and submitting proposals, or moving through political channels that I wouldn't have access to if it wasn't on behalf of my skin.
Where would, now speaking in that specific context, or the context of Zambia, where did that come from? Because here you have a quite successful sub-Saharan country that's been very peaceful for a long time and is fairly economically robust. So where has that kind of white privilege tradition, I guess, been ingrained in the culture? Or how does that happen?
Well, I wish that I was better educated and able to better articulate where I think it comes from. And these are my personal observations. I don't know where it comes from. I would speculate that It comes from a mixture of the wealth and power held by white agriculturalists and the white, not only British government, but also mining companies, and those who come in as major investors are often foreigners. They often have significant wealth in relation to host country nationals, and they often hire others for domestic work, but always remain as the leadership and don't allow Africans, Africans is a huge term, don't allow Zambians to come up into the leadership. I think another thing that contributes to it is the way that the British educational system was structured. Their schools were designed for rote memorization, and they were designed to produce butlers and maids and domestic staff. Their schools were not designed, and their curriculum was not designed to develop critical thinking or to develop people that could stand on their own as independent. And that is very obvious, not only in the curricula and the teaching styles, but also in its result, where you see many Zambians struggling to rise out of that and to become more. And you see some fantastic examples of entrepreneurs and well-educated Zambians who are just absolutely fantastic. I mean, I have so much respect and awe for them to overcome so many hurdles. Another issue I think that contributes to that is our development policy over the last 60 years. You know, coming out of the 1940s and the Marshall Plan, the United States and other European nations, as they restructured and grew, began to look abroad for other countries that they could help. And they developed an aid model that reached out and that, in many cases, was very patronizing and supported more political goals than humanitarian goals. And again, this is my own personal commentary. And as we move through that history of development, you saw a lot of the Cold War influences, you know, infighting between what dictator are we going to put in power, who are we going to support that'll, you know, sing our line and support us. And that has left a horrible scar. And then you also have aid organizations that don't have proper monitoring and evaluation, that don't have oversight, that just roll into a community, hand out shoes and shirts and books, and have a very patronizing attitude of getting dropped off out of a shiny new Land Cruiser and saying, well, you did this wrong, and you know what? You can't build a well there. Don't you know better? Of course you don't know better. You're so backwards. And, I mean, that's just ridiculous. But you have folks that do that. And you have Zambians who are trained with that mentality, that divide between urban and rural, and that divide between educated and uneducated Zambians who get out and have that extremely patronizing attitude. And it just strips the independence from people. It just absolutely creates this cycle of dependency on aid where you have no hope. It's like, oh, my bicycle broke. Well, I'm not going to fix it. If I stay here long enough, someone's going to come through and fix it for me. And why should I fix it or learn how to fix it? Because I can't sell that skill. You know, if I learn how to fix bicycles, well, nobody's fixing bicycles because as soon as they break, someone will come through and donate more. And, you know, a lot of that burden lies on aid. The way aid has been implemented, its lack of monitoring and evaluation, and a lot of that's getting better. In the last decade, we've seen unbelievable improvements in terms of monitoring and evaluation, in terms of impact, and in terms of actually making sure that when you're giving money and when you're supporting programs, you're seeing real change, and you're seeing the support of local groups and local organizations, and you're seeing their independence being grown and developed instead of being just trodden on and discarded like trash. And so when you combine those factors together, you have this mentality of, oh, well, I can't do anything myself. You know, I need someone to come and help me, which is false, absolutely false. And engendering that idea is awful. The inculcation of that mentality is disgusting. I mean, it's repugnant. And you have the education system, which is struggling to reform and trying to develop critical thinking and reach out to more and more Zambians. And you have the cultural heritage of what's left from the British control system. And you have influence from South Africans, and you have influence from politics and from history in that region, which has typically put whites on a pedestal of power. And that history is brutal, it's brutish and awful, and very real. And it's still present. We can't pretend like those things haven't happened and that there aren't people who have that memory ingrained in them from their childhood or from their parents' stories. Even though Zambia has been an independent nation since 1964 and has made unbelievable strides and is a fantastic place with absolutely amazing people, people that I still miss every day. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are so many other social and cultural contributing factors that I'm not aware of and that I don't have the education to perceive. But in my view, that's where I think some of it comes from.
If we bring that full circle then, briefly, now that you've returned to the U.S., how has that changed your relationship with racial dialogue and your own racial identity?
Well, I think I'm a little less politically correct about it. One, it was very difficult for me returning to come back to Arizona and to be exposed to hate speech and hateful rhetoric on public media, on radio stations, and on billboards, and on TV stations, and to have people in normal conversation, just be like, awful, just absolutely awful. And when you're away, you idolize the United States in some ways. It's home, and it's the land of opportunity, and it's the land where anyone can come and make their future. And that is still true. But when you get here and you're exposed to that kind of rhetoric again, you remember that there are dark sides to the United States as well. And yeah, it's been very difficult to readjust to. But that's also one of my goals, is to take the lessons that I learned in Zambia and to bring them back here, home, and throughout my education, through middle school and high school, through my work at Arizona State, and then through my work at the American Red Cross, and then even my Peace Corps experience, to bring those experiences, those revelations to bear, and to try and work together to make a better world. And I know it sounds idealistic, but that's the mentality. That's the goal. That's what's in here in my heart, and that's what I hope to do.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for tackling that. I know it's a very touchy topic, and I think you offered some incredible insights. It's surprisingly rare where we have the opportunity to basically experience both sides of the coin, and to have everything put in context that way. So I think stories like this definitely help bring that into focus. Again, you can learn more about his experience at davidberger.net, or I will have a link to his website and YouTube channel in the comments. Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it.